Hi everyone, welcome to the Business History channel. I am Kiran Kasbekar and today I am going to talk about Pan American World Airways, commonly known as Pan Am. There is so much happening in the field of global aviation today that even those of us who have lived for over 70 years tend to forget that there was once an airline called Pan Am. I have asked my younger colleagues and friends born in the 1980s and 1990s if they have heard of Pan Am, and they all said something like, Pan Am? What is that? And a couple of them thought I was referring to a brand of Indian cigarettes called Panama. They were surprised when I told them that it was an airline. What was history to me was news to them. Now, Pan Am wasn't just one of those airlines. It was the world's biggest and most innovative airline for over half a century. It was the first airline to fly all over the world, reaching 6 continents. There were at least 17 firsts the airline established between 1927 and 1978. That works out to 3 innovations every 3 years on an average. You can see a list of Pan Am's record of firsts if you click the link below. Then, after being buffeted by one global crisis after another, an American aviation policy that turned from being favorable to becoming almost hostile and biased against it, some of its own big disasters and some very poor management, the airline shut down permanently in December 1991. That is, more than 30 years ago. As I said in the intro to this video, if a large number of the viewers of this video were probably not born then in 1991, when Pan Am shut down forever, or were too young to be concerned with events in the airline industry, people like me who were around when the airline was alive and flying tend to forget it was there. Pan Am's fall is perhaps typical of leading companies stumbling and falling because they become too big to maneuver, too overextended, and unable to take quick decisions to fashion and implement a turnaround. Too many companies in this situation tend to throw more money at the problem instead of taking timely action to reverse the decline. That additional money goes down the drain. Big companies also find their maneuverability stymied by hardened labor attitudes that make cost reduction near impossible, which can be disastrous in a labor-intensive industry like the airline industry. Towards the end of its life, Pan Am's people did agree to concessions, including steep pay cuts, but by that time the decline had become irreversible. The airline was already under the control of a previously rival airline, which had other interests to take care of, and other external events battered its operations. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Let us begin at the beginning. You might be surprised to know that the first commercial airline in the world was not an American one. The first airline was the German airship company Delag, founded on 16 November 1909. But let's discount it because it flew airships and not airplanes. And in any case, it didn't last long. The 4 oldest non-airship airlines that still operate are the Netherlands KLM, launched in 1919, Colombia's Avianca in 1919, Australia's Qantas in 1920, and the Czech Republic's Czech Airlines in 1923. Britain's Imperial Airways, which was launched in 1924, all these airlines preceded Pan Am. There was also one remarkable American airline that preceded Pan Am by 13 years. This was the St. Petersburg-Tampa airboat line. The PT airboat line was launched on 1st January 1914 to fly this 10-mile route and became the first airline in the world that flew an aeroplane. Sadly, that airline did not last even a year. It shut down on 5th May in the same year. The PT airboat service saved people a great amount of time. For the 2 cities, St. Petersburg and Tampa, were up to a day's journey apart in 1913, depending on the means of travel that were chosen. It took people 2 hours by boat, 4 to 12 hours by train, and 20 hours by car. The airplane cut the travel time to about 23 minutes. The St. Petersburg Board of Trade signed a 3-month contract with the airline on 17 December 1913, under which the Board of Trade agreed to compensate the airline for any losses it might incur. But the airline was beset by more troubles than it could handle. The airline's hangars were not ready by the promised date, and horror of horrors, the company's green and yellow aircraft, the Lark of Duluth, went missing for several days before the launch date. Why? Because the freight train carrying it got lost. Amazing, isn't it? But that's how things were those days. The lifetime record of the airline from beginning to end was this. It made 172 flights over 7,000 miles and carried a total of 1,205 passengers. Pan Am, founded as Pan American Airways and renamed as Pan American World Airways, was more fortunate. Launched in 1927 by two former US Army Air Corps majors as a scheduled airmail and passenger service between Key West in Florida and Havana in Cuba, and then merged with two other airlines, Pan Am thrived for over 5 decades until it hit severe turbulence with the oil crisis in 1973. It finally succumbed to its losses on 4 December 1991, 64 years after its birth. The man behind the terrific success of the airline was one Terry Tripp. Tripp's love affair with aviation began in 1909. In that year, when he celebrated his 10th birthday, his banker father took him to an air race in New York where the aircraft flew around the Statue of Liberty. The highlight of the show was a match between Glenn Curtis, American aviation and motorcycling pioneer, and a founder of the American aircraft industry, and his main rivals, the Wright brothers. The star of the show turned out to be Wilbur Wright in his clattering biplane. He flew 3 figure-8 patterns in the windy air around the Statue of Liberty to the delight of thousands of spectators. The young Tripp was absolutely bowled over, and he decided that day that he was going to build his career in the aviation business. And that's what he did many years later when he took charge of Pan Am and turned it into the world's most successful airline during his time. But remember, those were the very early days of the airline industry. There was no industry really for Tripp to enter and succeed in. He had to make the industry nearly from scratch. In 1922, the aviation pioneers had nobody's shoulders to stand on. The aviation companies of those days had to be built from scratch. Most people would have felt daunted by the challenge. But Tripp had decided this was his life's ambition. He was committed. For a start, Tripp tapped his former Yale classmates and sold them stock in his new airline, which he called Long Island Airways. Then he bought 7 Navy surplus Aeromarine float planes for $5,000 each at an auction. The single-engine Aeromarine aircraft normally accommodated a pilot and 1 passenger. What Tripp did then was to replace the Aeromarine's 90 horsepower engine with a 220 horsepower engine so that he could modify his planes to carry 2 passengers instead of 1. That paid dividends. And that early initiative gave him an insight into how a company could spread costs and improve profits. He used this lesson successfully in later years, taking his airline to greater and greater success. The key was to increase seating capacity to increase revenues. Despite his innovation, however, the venture failed. In 1924, the company was bankrupt. But although the company had failed, Tripp had learned some valuable lessons about things like keeping accounts, taking care of aircraft maintenance, and raising funds. Soon afterwards, the US Congress passed the Airmail Act of 1925, also called the Kelly Act. The new law provided Tripp the opportunity of a lifetime. The Kelly Act gave the post office the authority to negotiate with private companies for the carriage of airmail, and that involved a subsidy. America's fledgling airline industry would be subsidized by postal revenues. The new airmail routes drew applications from hundreds of speculators and investors. Tripp saw that the rules of the game had changed. Plenty of money could now be made in the flying business. He realized that this could be a beginning of substantial revenues and profits in the airline business if he played his cards well. He formed his airline firm, the Aviation Corporation of the Americas. And among the people he invited as investors and directors were some of his rich, old-school friends, people like John Hambleton, a rich banker's son and a war hero, banking heir Cornelius Whitney, and financier William A. Rockefeller, who had flown with Tripp in the Yale Aero Club. The firms competing for the contract were the Aviation Corporation of the Americas, formed by Johann Tripp in June 1927 with a sum of $250,000, which had acquired another venture, American International Airways, a small airline established as a seaplane service from Key West in Florida to Havana in Cuba. Atlantic, Gulf and Caribbean Airways, which was established in October 1927 by investment banker Richard Hoyt to bid for the contract, and Pan American Airways, to whom the US Postal Service awarded the contract for mail delivery to Cuba, but which lacked any aircraft to perform the job and did not have landing rights in Cuba. The first two companies merged with Pan Am. Tripp and his partners held 40% of the equity. Tripp's friend Whitney was made president of Pan American Airways and Tripp became operational head. The US government then helped Pan Am by insulating it from its US competitors, making the airline the preferred vehicle for US based international air routes. That virtual monopoly of foreign routes helped Pan Am expand rapidly around the world. And can you imagine something like this happening in a modern airline? At age 28, Tripp became president and general manager of the airline. But his task had just begun. Now, this was a time when there were not too many airstrips in America for aeroplanes to use, and ones that did get laid were not very well built. Naturally, for the aviation business was just beginning. This became a serious problem for the fledgling airline. For the airmail contract, it set a deadline for service to commence by 19th October 1927. The airline had purchased 3-engine Fokker land planes, but there was no runway at Key West from which they could operate. Well, there was an old moth-eaten military airstrip. Construction crews had been working for weeks to repair the surface and to expand it. But the rains came and all the work was washed away. The runway surfaces were relaid, only to be washed away again, leaving big holes in the ground that made the runway unworthy for aviation. It now looked as if the entire venture was headed for disaster. For the airmail contract stipulated a deadline for the service to begin on 19th October 1927. With just days to go before that, the runway was not ready. If Pan Am could not begin its postal service on 19th October, not only would it lose the contract, it would also forfeit the $25,000 bond it had posted with its application for the contract. Remember, the $25,000 of those days would be equivalent to about $850,000, nearly $1 million today, just in terms of today's dollar value. And that was a princely sum for a startup venture of those days. So Tripp traveled to Washington DC to plead with the postmaster to give Pan Am an extension of the 19th October deadline. The postmaster refused to grant any extension. It looked like the end of the road for Pan Am. Its contract would be forfeited, some other airline would get the contract, and Pan Am would be out of business even before it lifted off the ground. The irony of it all was that on 17th October, the first of the new Fokker trimotor planes which Tripp had ordered landed in Miami on their way to Key West and the inaugural service to Havana. But there was no runway for them to land there or to take off from 2 days later. The construction team was working frantically to get the runway ready, but it rained again and the runway was a mass of craters all over again. Now there was no hope of flying on 19th October. Pan Am was going to be finished before it even started. And then there appeared a deus ex machina. In case you have not heard this Latin phrase, it's this. Deus ex machina means God out of the machine. This was a device used in drama plots where a completely unexpected event would suddenly solve a seemingly impossible problem. For Pan Am, the unexpected savior came in the form of Cyril Caldwell, who was one of the 1920s barnstormers, rum runners, and fly for the hell of it adventurers, as one author described him. Barnstormers was the term used to describe the breed of devil-may-care stunt pilots that cropped up in the early days of aviation. On an ordinary day, the Pan Am staff wouldn't have looked at Caldwell twice. But on 18th October 1927, Caldwell possessed just what the Pan Am bosses had been desperately hoping for. He had a float plane, a Fairchild FC-2 named La Nina, which Caldwell was ferrying to the Dominican Republic. The amphibian plane was equipped with pontoon-like floats and didn't need the Key West runway. It could land in and take off from water, from the sea next to Key West. Pan Am's Key West manager, J.E. Whitbeck, approached Caldwell seeking his services to carry the postal cargo. Caldwell was not interested in flying to Havana. He wanted to be in Santo Domingo the next day. So what did Whitbeck say? He asked, how much would Caldwell charge for his services? Caldwell's reaction was, hey, why didn't you say that before? He thought about it and said, how about say $175? Does that sound like peanuts for booking an entire plane flight? Today it does, but it truly was an excellent price for those days. Done, said Whitlock. Problem solved. The morning of 19th October, Caldwell took 7 bags of mail containing 30,000 letters aboard his Fairchild seaplane. He took off, and in 1 hour and 20 minutes he landed his plane in Havana Harbor. Pan Am was saved. I hope you liked this part of the Pan Am story. I shall upload the next part of the story, which gets even more exciting than this one, in a few days. So do visit us again and tell your friends and colleagues too. And if you've not already subscribed to the Business History channel, please do so, for then you will be alerted every time we upload a new video here. Do also visit our website bh.domainb.com to get a lot more content on business history, including lists of books and book reviews, people, some fun tidbits, and a business history quiz. From there, you will also get access to a wide range of business news and content on InfoMachine, the web-based business intelligence and knowledge management system that finds, tracks, and downloads relevant news from your selected sources, saving you hours of grind and toil. It's free of cost. The product links are given below in the description to the video. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you with our next video. Until then, goodbye.